What happens when the world decides who you are before you even have a chance to speak? When your name becomes a headline, your identity a label in a story you did not write, have no interest in being in, but now find that you suddenly can't escape. Well, that's Amanda Knox. If you put her name in a search engine, you get more than 150 million different results, theories, opinions, crazy ideas, whatever. And she has a story. That's because she has a very painful story, but one that I think we can all learn from. Now, when I thought about having her on and I said, you know what, I'll give a recap of her story for those of you who don't know it. I can't imagine that there are not many of you who don't know it. But when I thought about it, I said, you know what, this is her story. No one tells it better than she does. And I would love to start by first saying, Amanda, honored to have you. I have followed you for a very, very long time. I think as well as becoming a mother, probably had a little bit of a different insight into what you went through after all of that. But could you give my audience a little bit about your story and bring us up to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So, uh, I guess most people are familiar with who I am because when I studied abroad when I was 20 years old, one of my roommates was brutally raped and murdered in our house. I was subsequently accused of being involved with that crime. And it was a tremendously scandalous international headline making case that was very unethically covered in the media. I was twisted into this horrific, cartoonish, femme fatale caricature, and evidence of my innocence was overlooked. Evidence of guilt was invented. And I spent 4 years in prison before I was eventually acquitted. So I was convicted of the crime. I was eventually acquitted. I was tried again while I was free. I was convicted again, faced extradition until the Italian Supreme Court definitively exonerated me.
That was in
That said,
2015, right?
yeah, that was in 2015. So I spent about 8 years on trial, 4 of which I spent in prison. And then my story began in a way because everything I've told you up to this point is just a thing that happened to me that I had extremely zero control over. And suddenly I was sort of faced with the prospect of re-entering the world, but, branded as a villain. And even those who were convinced of my innocence, I was very much the girl accused of murder. And I was living with that burden as a young person, trying to navigate how to exist in the world, how to have faith in people and institutions again. And it was a long journey of recovering a sense of identity, a sense of place, a sense of purpose, and a sense of agency in my own life. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this because I want to know, and I think a lot of people listening want to know, first and foremost, how are you? So like from on a scale of -100 to, I imagine that -100 must have been in prison, to today, on a scale of like 1 to 10, where are you in your life?
I'm doing fabulous. I would say I'm a 9 in the sense that
That no one's
I
110. No one's
yeah,
ever a
no
10.
no one's ever a 10, right? They're always like that's the great thing of life is it always gives you problems to solve. It's never boring. But yeah, so I'm a mother, I'm a writer, I'm a public
Podcaster.
speaker, I'm a podcaster, I'm a performer. I executive produced a new TV show on Hulu called The Twisted Tale of
We're
Amanda
going all
Knox.
into that one. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I recently published a book called Free, My Search for Meaning, which really delves into my journey of trying to make sense of this really big experience and how to reintegrate into life and my journey to reconcile with my prosecutor. So I've
Yeah.
been busy. I've been busy in a good way. I'm very, very busy. I have 2 small
No.
children, you know.
Well, that right in itself keeps you crazy busy doing everything else on the side. But, listen, I know myself for one, I am just so happy that you're doing so terrific. And
Aw,
I think
thanks.
I really want to take the listeners through, I think I mentioned to you prior to us kind of hopping on is that I found one of the things with your book was like almost that it was self-help for anyone. So I can't wait to dig down on that. But I want to go back to something that I listened to that I think if we go back to that sort of period when you first got out of prison in 2011, that started something very different for you. I mean, I know that when we look at life and we say, listen, I can't go back and reclaim myself. I'm not the same
Mm,
person. I'm different, right? So in terms of whatever that reinvention looks like, you said at one point that you felt a part of you actually died in Perugia, which anyone can understand. And I think anyone that goes through any sort of trauma, it's about rebuilding and not so much going back, but moving forward. But one thing you said, and it hit me very, very hard, is that you said you came out with learned helplessness. What do you mean by that? What was that like?
Well, the prison environment specifically is designed to render you helpless. You cannot open a door on your own. You can't, like, you do not have possession of your possessions. You do, like, there is very little that you have actual control over. Your mind, basically, is the one thing. Like, you do not have control over your body. You do not have control over your relationships. You do not have control over anything. Your day to day is strictly regimented according to the laws of the prison. Your diet, like, just everything is out of your control. So that aspect of it is an extreme learned helplessness. But also, I had an extra layer of learned helplessness from being wrongly convicted, right? Like, the
Absolutely.
truth didn't matter in my case originally, when I was originally convicted. I was an innocent person who was, definitively called a murderer and a monster and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. And it didn't matter that that wasn't true. They sent me back to prison anyway. And I had this like existential crisis of realizing, like, well, if the truth doesn't matter, and how can I fight this fight? Like,
No,
how do
right.
I have control in my life if the very thing that I thought that I could count on, the truth, wasn't there for me, like, wasn't enough? And so I certainly re-entered the world even after my acquittal and I was released from prison with this sense of feeling like I was unmoored, that even though I had been vindicated and freed, I knew that there are things that we think are guaranteed in life, and they are not guaranteed. Like, there's no guarantee that your life will be fair. There is no guarantee that you will have a significant say in what happens to you. And that this illusion of control that we all live with is in fact an illusion. And so I had to grapple with that and that feeling of just deeply existential helplessness, and find a way over time to rediscover what it is that I actually have control over.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think as a human being, when I heard you kind of say that, I thought grateful. And, I can't imagine what we probably take for granted on a daily basis, but also it's almost like retraining your brain. And one of the things I saw, actually, we talked about your books. I know you did one in 2013, Waiting to be Heard, and then the most recent one, which I really, really loved, Free My Search for Meaning. You've done your podcast, you've done a lot of things. And during that journey, even the title of your book from 2013 to now shows me progress of kind of where you're going in your journey. But I have to tell you, the Hulu series, this one in particular, I felt something different. Now, I followed you for some time. I felt, at least from seeing this, that was probably the closest of reality in some respects that it really was. And I did hear you some point saying that you really wanted to make sure you got this right.
Oh,
So
yes.
so did this help was this a little therapeutic for you? Because it's a great, I can't wait for the next one to come out. I think 4 drops tomorrow or 5 drops
Wednesday.
tomorrow.
Yeah, it's
But
Wednesday. Yeah.
like every week on my exercise, I'm
You're like, oh,
riveted. But I know the
yeah.
next one goes out, so go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, me and all of my partners in the making of The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox on Hulu were from the very beginning, aware that the story of what happened to Meredith and what happened to me had been twisted and distorted and exploited for so long. And we were not in the business of replicating that kind of storytelling. And at the same time, we were all deeply invested in the big lessons that one can derive from a
Yes.
close and honest examination of this story.
Yes.
And so I think we all were very, very aware that there were very high stakes going into this story, and we had to get so much of it right because of how much it had been gotten wrong in the past. And so what that looked like is a tremendous amount of research on the part of my partners, who, analyzed every facet, every court document, had everything translated, looked at dozens and dozens of interviews and written material from not just me, but also my prosecutor and the other important figures that are in the story. And one of the big things for me was, and again, my partners really embraced this idea, was that this is not a story that's black and white. It's not about good guys and bad guys. What's really important is understanding how everyone can feel like the hero of their own story, and yet this like perfect storm of conflicting perspectives and language and culture can lead to like dire results. And so, yeah.
That's the whole language thing. I've been taking Spanish for like 12 years. And if I was in that situation, they'd be like, I understand it pretty well, but get me to speak under duress, very difficult. And then I'm afraid you're going to, misunderstand, not understand what I say. But so going back to this, I find excellent job on that. One of the things I do know is that one of your executive producers, I believe, is someone else who went through something very, very, in a similar vein, similar thread. So first of all, tell me a little bit about that friendship and how did that sort of, I imagine that's got to be somewhat therapeutic for you as well, finding common threads among people who've been through something similar.
Yeah, so this project would not exist were it not for Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky is a friend and mentor of mine who I met back in 2017 initially. I met her right before I was ever going to give my first ever public talk. And it was at a time in my life where I was terrified to be in a room full of strangers. And I had been invited to speak about, controversy and trial by media, but I had no idea if anyone would listen to me. All of my experience up to that point was people not listening to me and people, looking at me through the worst possible light and filtering everything I said through the worst possible interpretation, the least generous interpretation. And so I was very, very nervous. And she was somebody who similarly had been publicly vilified, publicly humiliated at a very young age,
yes.
at a very young age, sexualized and vilified for her sexuality. And so when I thought of anybody who could give me guidance for how to navigate this very obstructed path towards having standing up for myself and, elevating my own voice above the chorus of voices who are already authoring my experience, I thought Monica Lewinsky. And then, so she gave me, great mentorship advice, and then years later reached out to me after she had executive produced her own series about her own experience, impeachment, and said, hey, I know you've turned down opportunities like this in the past, but would you consider telling your story in a new way? And I think the things that she and I really saw eye to eye on was again, the public humiliation, especially of young women aspect, and revisiting those narratives about young women who are publicly vilified. And then on top of that, wanting to discuss what is the bigger story, right? Like, so much of when we think of a true crime story, which is what people sort of interpret my story to be, it's a courtroom drama, that's what it's limited to. And in fact, the story is a much longer story of trauma and recovery than just what exists in the courtroom. And it also doesn't just happen to the one person who's at the center of it, but also to their families, to their friends. They belong to people. And that was something that was really important for both Monica and me, is that we really tried to showcase the bigger impact of this very traumatic experience.
It's a ripple effect for sure. And it's funny. I recently interviewed Denise Huskins. I don't know if you ever saw her series American Nightmare on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Something very, bless her heart, right? I mean, she said something that I thought was very important. She and her husband chose courage over comfort. And I would say that's the same for both of you. You have to go through and say, either I can go away and hide, right? Or I can go out there and say, no, I'm going to find my voice. And as hard as that must be, you have to do that to become somewhat whole again. I truly believe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely of the philosophy that you need to confront the thing that scares you instead of run away from it. But I have that perspective because I don't think that you can really run away from the things that scare you.
Yeah.
Like you can't ultimately, they just stay inside you. That hurt
You're right.
stays inside you. And so I'm always trying to like draw it out of me like a poison. And that's how it feels, less like a choice and more like a necessity.
So let's talk about a few of those things, because in reading your book, it's very raw to me. I really could feel some of the things. Like, I think you did a really good job at kind of explaining the very visceral sort of experiences you had, whether it is walking out and touching a door, whether it is looking at something in a certain light and seeing things differently with different glasses because of now where you had found yourself. But there are about 5 mantras I walked away that I think are part of your how, meaning how did you start to find yourself? How did you reclaim your agency? How did you all of a sudden, even though you may have been, locked away, you still had your mind. And I think you somehow dug deep somewhere to be able to realize some things. So, I want to go through a few of them, and kind of, if you can give me just a little bit on what that meant to you and where you used it. Like, freedom is practice. Could you give me a little bit of where that came from?
Yeah, so free my search for meaning, it's called that because I felt like this idea of freedom is something that has a huge resonance for me in my life. This, clearly, my freedom was taken away from me in a very literal sense. But even after it was given back to me, I had limitations imposed on me that felt like obstacles to self-realization. And so I had to rediscover what freedom looked like for me in my life. And what I realized is that it's less about the external circumstances necessarily that you find yourself in,
Yes.
and it's more about the mindset that you have within those circumstances and how you choose to engage within the limitations. And so that's why it's a practice. It's a thing that you choose to do. Because I think one of the big sort of like mind-blowing things for me was realizing that even if I'm not in a prison cell, I'm still bound by the
Yeah, you
circumstances of
are.
my life. And if I have the mindset like in a prison cell of if only I was not in this prison cell, well, I'm going to be living in a state of limbo because here I am, like actually in a prison cell, and I'm not living the life that I have, which is in a prison cell. And the same thing could be said of whatever circumstances that we can say about our life. We can say, oh, if only I wasn't sick, or oh, if only I wasn't this thing or that thing. And that can become a debilitating limitation in our life instead of a limitation that we acknowledge
Sure,
and then
sure.
say, okay, how do I be effective? How do I move? How do I exist? How do I make meaningful choices within the bounds of what is possible?
Well, and I think that probably goes into what the next sort of thing I've learned from you is, if you're saying pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And that kind of goes back to that, right? We all have pain. We all experience things. It depends, I guess, in some respects, either how we reframe it or what we do with it. So for you, how in the world were you able to realize that? Or what made you realize that? And how did you work through it?
Yeah. So, and to clarify for anyone who doesn't quite know what that means, pain is the things that just like you stub your toe, you feel
Right.
pain. You lose your child to a disease, you have pain, right? This is
Right.
pain. This is inevitable pain, the parts of life that happen to us. Suffering is when we feel pain because we have pain. Suffering is when it's an extra layer of pain on top of inevitable pain where we resist the fact that pain is happening to us, and that just causes us more pain. We don't want to have stubbed our toes. We don't want to have, lost our friend. There are
Right.
lots of, and that is an extra layer of pain that, is real because we are complicated animals and we are sophisticated and our brains are sophisticated and we can appreciate these nuances to our life. But ultimately, I find that they can be really, really debilitating because, yeah, I mean, you just feel like you can overindulge in suffering to the extent that you lose the ability to like the pain has already, like maybe the immediate pain has already gone, but the suffering will last forever.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying, and I think you somehow have been able to kind of take that rationality, which is a good thing. No one deserves to suffer forever. Why keep? That's only going to continue to handcuff you. It's only going to be, impact you in a negative perspective. When is suffering enough, and when am I free to go live the life I dreamed? And I think that is one that a lot of women can really relate to. I mean, I don't know if it's because in some respects we've been nurturers our entire lives, so we assume and take on everybody else's thoughts and feelings forever. But I think that's such an important one because you came out, had tremendous pain, and at some point you have realized, you know what? It's inevitable, but I can't live it forever. That's not helping anyone.
I think another thing, and this is particular to women, I think as well, is people tend to disbelieve our pain and to undermine it and diminish
Minimalize it. Yeah,
and minimalize it.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that people who really indulge in suffering might be motivated by is the fear that if they get over it, it somehow means that the pain wasn't real.
Or that they didn't, yeah, or that they somehow aren't sincere, or that you're exactly
Yes.
right, that there's something wrong, that they didn't suffer enough.
Right. Right. And this idea that like, unless you're, and this goes back to like even mourning practices and how women had to wear like black the rest of their lives when their husband died in order to signal, signal that like that they had a real commitment to someone. And so it's like you have to be in pain and you have to be showcasing your pain for people to believe that it is real. And that's just not fair.
No.
It's just not fair. And so, especially when you like, it's, funny, like on the one hand, we want to celebrate resilience and we want to celebrate being functional. And on the other hand, we punish people. Like I've had people say to me, well, what happened to you must not have been that bad because look how well you're doing now. And it's like,
yeah, not fair. I mean,
that's
listen,
not fair. Yeah.
No, it's not. I think we have one life to live. And I think we all, listen, again, we go through bumps and bruises. What you went through was a train wreck. I will never, but I think we all have something to learn from that because at the end of the day, right, everyone deserves to live a life that they dreamed of, right? And I think in that respect, you moving forward and being able to teach and help others to get through something truly horrific is a really good thing to do. Let me go to the next one. Forgiveness as freedom and forgiveness without apology. This is a very interesting one to me because I don't know. Do you hold any resentment at this point or have you let that go?
Well, that's a good question. To get to your point about forgiveness, that's going to be a way for me to answer this question is I did not. So part of the book that I talk about, and actually part of the show that you see, is this relationship that I developed with my prosecutor and this confrontation that we have ultimately because I asked him to meet face to face with me.
I know. We're going to that one deep.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but like when we talk about forgiveness, like that's immediately what comes to mind is it's like in my life when have I felt the urge or need to forgive. And, there are plenty of times where I have to forgive myself for being young and being naive and all those things. But like the big one is my adversary, the guy who threw me in prison. And when I initially reached out to him, it was not freedom that I had in mind. It was curiosity. It was
curiosity.
Yes. Like I was haunted by the fact that I did not understand why what happened to me happened to me. Like, it wasn't random in the sense that it wasn't like just a flash of lightning struck me and there's like no explanation for it. Somebody chose to put me in prison and believed that they were right in doing so. But also, I was completely innocent and there was no reason to think that I had anything to do with this crime. So why? Why did this man who had, a whole history and life and context behind him, why did he see a monster in me? And why did he pursue a case against me even when evidence revealed who actually murdered my roommate? Like, why? And so I was just haunted by not understanding. And so I eventually came around to the idea that I should just ask him.
Yes, and we're gonna get into that because that is even a deeper one. But before we get to that, I want to hit one
Yes.
more, and then we're going to
Okay.
save that one for a little longer
Okay.
conversation. If you're stuck, you are not. Choose freedom. Can you give me a little bit of what you thought? And did you have that thought when you were actually in prison, or was this something you developed after you came out? If you're stuck, you are not. Choose freedom.
So, if you are alive, there are always options. There are always options. And this was something that became very, very apparent to me when I was actually in the prison because I saw people responding to imprisonment in radically different ways. Some people were so driven by dread and despair that they all they did was just lay in bed all day, and they
Wow.
often would like take medications that just put them into a zombie like stupor, and they were just zombies. They were just like living dead in the prison. And then I saw other people. Yes, we're trapped in a prison cell, but we're playing cards, we're writing letters to our family, we're learning a new language. Like there were people who were able to view the same conditions in a very different way. And for
Wow.
me, and I even had that shift at a certain point because after I was convicted and I was sentenced to 26 years, I wasn't just like waiting to get my life back again. I was like there. And I had to figure out how, if there was any way, to live a life that had any kind of value within those restrictions. And often that came from a shift in mindset, not from a shift in circumstances.
Let's talk about that because I think that's really important for people to understand. I don't know if I would be the zombie or I would be someone that eventually found purpose. I would hope at some point there would be some sort of inner drive that would take over. You find out that you are now sentenced to 26 years originally, right? You go in. What is that process between that moment and when you started to get some part of you back, and what mindset shift? How did that happen?
I mean, I think the big difference between those of us who give up and those of us who find a way is a deep, deep knowledge that we are loved.
Wow.
I think that like a deep, deep knowledge that we have value. And like one of the things that a prison sentence does to you is it's really what it's saying to you is that you do not have value. You are going to lose this many years of your life to an environment where you have no opportunity to pursue your potential. That's what it feels like.
That's what it feels
You
like. That, wow.
are entombed for as long as we have decided. You are in a tomb. That's what it feels like. And the only way to push back against that narrative that is imposed on you is a deep, deep sense of personal value, which I believe comes from feeling loved.
And feeling connected and having your family, feeling loved amongst those people who know you, right? I would imagine.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that my mom, who's
Yeah.
a big character in the book because she's
Love
a
her.
huge
Yeah.
person in my life, like she instilled in me from a very young age a deep, deep knowledge that my life had value, that I was loved. And so even when the world turned its back on me and entombed me, I knew that there was something worth fighting for. And so I tried to find a way to fight for it. And, that meant looking around, like having the courage to open my eyes and be curious about my surroundings enough to see the opportunities within the limitations. So, what that might look like for me, I went to Italy to study languages because I wanted to become a translator. And lo and behold, there was a huge population in the prison who didn't speak Italian
Yeah.
because they were foreigners. And as soon as I became fluent, I became the unofficial translator of the prison. So I was called in to help people like talk to their lawyers and talk to the doctor and read their court documents and write their letters to their family. And it wasn't what I envisioned when I initially went to
That's a
study
good
abroad.
feeling, though. Don't you
But
agree? That's a really good feeling. I found
yeah,
just from having that ability to cross culturally, it's a really cool feeling. So, but what you just said to me was extremely profound, and I appreciate and acknowledge you sharing that sort of deep sort of experience because I don't know if any of us Very few people will ever know what you just expressed, and that just makes me feel grateful, but it also makes me feel deep empathy for you. And I am glad that you have such a loving feeling connection with others, because that obviously has really fueled your success afterwards. So, I want to go into this last one, which is agency as clarity, and I've left this one for last because I think we want to spend some time on this, and we're going to break it down a little bit. It's what Amanda ended up doing is something unthinkable for most of us, but I think it also is a testament to actually that drive that she has inside of her, or that she needed to understand, which is probably bigger than any of us. And I think in some respects, after following her so much, I think it's something that really did help her. So hang on, we're going to hit on part 2. And I want to thank Amanda for her time here today. We're going to pick up very quickly on part 2 in a little bit. But if any of you are out there listening, if you enjoyed this episode and it sparked something in you, please leave a review, leave a comment. That is the best way to help the show grow. And I want you to keep pushing through your own fear. Remember, you are so worth it. You have so much to give. Start believing in yourself, and we're going to teach you how. We're going to continue to teach you how, and this is how she did it. We are back with Amanda Knox. In the first episode, Amanda shared her journey, a harrowing journey, one that none of us can imagine. But she's also done something great since this journey has been a bit behind her. She has evolved. She has brought her knowledge. She has brought so much to each and every one of us to learn how any of us can go through something so horrendous and maybe come out a little differently, not necessarily at all what we were, but to move through it a little bit. She explained how she went through something very tragic in 2007, went through, I think, 2 acquittals, 2 convictions. She definitively was found not guilty of her roommate's death in 2015, and has since rebuilt herself in a new way. She wrote a book. She's written 2 books. She's been on podcasts. She's a public speaker. And now I think she's even a little bit of a comedian. So we've been seeing her really evolve and appreciate that sort of journey she's gone through. During her last time here, we spoke about some of the mantras, the how-tos that I am trying to bring to each and every one of you, because they are so critical. And we have dug down deep in a few of them. Freedom is practice. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. Forgiveness as freedom, and forgiveness without apology. If you're stuck, choose freedom. And now this one that I really want to dig into a little bit, because it's an amazing story. I don't know if you are all aware of this story, but to me it is one of those stories that if you ever go through something traumatic, bad, whatever, this to me, at least from what Amanda's explained, this agency as clarity, I think is really that little bit of a secret sauce that many of us probably don't realize is missing, that can really make a difference in our life. So, I want to dig into that a little bit. Amanda, we touched on it a little bit in part 1, but tell me a little bit about your decision to do something that many of us would think would be off the table. And if I was your mom, I'd say, no, Amanda, not going. But you went you faced the very man that nearly took your life away.
Yeah, I tackled the beast. No, I'm just kidding.
You did.
Yeah, I love that you call it the secret sauce, because I think you're right that in the last episode where we were talking, I talked about how I was not really driven to meet with my prosecutor out of a sense of wanting to forgive him. That was not like something that was important to me It was more that I was driven by the fact that I did not understand him. I did not understand how a person who believed themselves to be a good person could make such devastating choices that had harmed so many innocent people. And I could not understand it. And so if anything, I was driven from a place of curiosity. I really wanted to understand him. And so I reached out to him and I asked him if he would meet with me.
Now, did you write a letter? Did you call him? Like, how does that happen with the language barrier, the distance? Hey, it's Amanda here. I mean, how does that go?
At this point, I was already fluent in Italian, so the language wasn't a barrier anymore. Okay. However, you're right. Like, how do you reach out to your prosecutor? I had only ever encountered him in my interrogation room and in the courtroom. That was all I knew him from. However, I did meet someone in the prison named Don Saulo, who was the prison chaplain, my dearest friend in the prison environment, who also happened to know my prosecutor on a personal level, because Perugia is a very small town, and he actually had been my prosecutor's priest for a long time when my prosecutor was growing up.
Interesting.
So that we had this connection, this mediator, and I asked my friend Don Saulo to deliver a letter to my prosecutor, whose name is Giuliano Mignini. And at first, Giuliano Mignini didn't know if he was even allowed to read a letter from me. It was like just unheard of. He didn't know if there were like legal implications. He was worried that there might be some kind of like legal problem with a prosecutor and a former defendant communicating with each other. It was unheard of. And so, of course, there was no law, but primarily because it was unheard of.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. He probably was like, well, this is unusual. But listen, again, your case was unusual. So all the cards are off the table for that. Yeah.
And so when I reached out to him, I had a choice about how I was going to confront this conversation. And I knew that if I were to come out guns blazing, WTF, like, why did you do this to me? You knew it was wrong. Like, I knew that he would just get defensive and adversarial again, because that was what our whole relationship had been up to this point, was adversarial, because it was within the justice system. It was an adversarial justice system. And so by its very nature, that dictated the terms of our relationship. And I felt like if I were to approach him in an adversarial way, he was just going to dig in his heels, entrench himself further into his own perspective, and not be willing to actually find common ground with me. And so
I have to, I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to ask you, I can only imagine, like, at least the little bit that I know you, what must have been running through your head up until that meeting? What was the first word you were going to say? Were you going to shake his hand? Were you not? Were you going to sit? Were you going to look in my eye? Were you going to smile? Were you not? I can only imagine, given what you went through, what must have been racing through your head.
Oh, yeah, including the question of, am I crazy? Like, what am?
Well, I'm sure your mom told you that.
Yeah, well, especially when I told my parents what my plan was, they were just like, why? Or, at this point, I was also very deeply involved with innocence work and the innocence movement. I'm an advocate for criminal justice reform in the United States now. And all of my friends within that community, lawyers, scientists, other wrongly convicted people, all of them told me that it was a waste of my time, that prosecutors never admit that they are wrong. He will never be able to he will never be come to see you as the person you really are, because he has this idea of you in his head that he cannot let go of, because it is so a part of his identity that you're a villain. And I heard all of that, and yet I didn't believe it, because deep, deep down, I felt like my prosecutor was not an evil person. He was just a man who had made a very grave mistake. And that already positioned me in such a way to have compassion for him.
Right. That's what it's just, I can feel that from you, right?
Like, I was like, it must be really, really hard to be him. And whether or not he is aware of, or like whether or not he has consciously acknowledged to himself the mistake that he made, nevertheless, this has been one of the most contentious case of his life that has come to define his career. He's done, hundreds, thousands of cases, and yet this one case where he got it so wrong is like a defining moment in his life. Yeah. And I had compassion for him. And so when I approached speaking to him, I was like, well, maybe the reason why this hasn't worked before is because everyone is so entrenched in that adversarial perspective. What if I come at him with common ground? What if I come at him acknowledging that he himself could have felt hurt or misrepresented or misunderstood in the course of this whole ordeal?
Because he was in it 8 years as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so when the lead into that conversation was me going, Dr. Giuliano Mignini, I don't know who you are. And, I've been in a courtroom with you hundreds of times, but I don't know who you are. And I don't think you know who I am. And, I've seen interviews with you in the media. I've seen how the way the media talks about you, and it's not nice. And I've seen how the media talks about me, and it's not nice. And I feel like just like I was misrepresented in the media, you probably feel misrepresented in the media too. And I want to know who you really are. I really want to understand you.
Yeah, that's a smart way of looking at it. I mean, it really is. And at the bottom line, I think that is sort of what you did want to know. You sort of, were trying
I
to
was telling him the
the
truth for
curiosity. Yeah,
sure.
you sort of did. You sort of wanted just to understand because that was going to help you probably get a little closer to that curiosity piece of saying, how did this all happen, right?
Yeah. How did this all happen? What can we do to prevent these kinds of things in the future? All of that comes
Yeah.
from seeing the world clearly, which is a little bit getting back to that mantra that we were chatting about at the beginning, which is like the only way that you can see the world or like you can effectively engage in the world is if first you see it clearly. And if I had written off my prosecutor as an evil tyrant, I wasn't going to be able to make choices to affect change in a positive way because I would have been working with a fantasy. I would have been making choices about a fantasy, and it probably would have been unethical because
Yeah.
just like my prosecutor sought to punish me for a fantasy, if I just was convinced in my head that he was a monster, I would feel compelled to punish him too, and that's not what I wanted to do.
And it wouldn't help your healing, I don't think either, because I
No.
mean, it's similar. I've gone through something not even close, but I mean, something in my life at some point where, someone hurts you tremendously in that respect, and you kind of create this whole scenario in your head a little bit. And you coming face to face to him must have put something in a different way. It must have put him a little bit on defense because now he's having to speak with you in a totally different way than how you were imprisoned. But it takes away a lot of those crazy thoughts that we have, or like you said, the fantasy that we have as this person's just a mean whatever, and it makes it more human. Tell me about your journey there. Did you have any fear? Was there any fear that anything could happen to you once nothing could happen to you? You were definitively fine, but like, was it
I
real
mean,
scary?
I hadn't done anything bad the first time and I got sent to prison. So,
Exactly. You're absolutely
I
right. But
mean,
nothing
there's
bad
no
could happen to
guarantee.
you. Yeah, you don't. Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
everything bad could happen to me.
I know, right? I can't think about it. You're right. You're right. I just know. I'm thinking. It had to be a little scary, but you looked at it with different lenses. I assume. I'm not really sure. And then you go to meet with him. What is that like when he comes walking through the like? Where were you? And
Well, I don't want to give away too much because the show portrays this, but yes, like
okay, don't worry.
I,
Okay.
but I will say that and I think this is, I think the bigger thing. Yes, I was absolutely terrified going into this encounter. And I was terrified in large part. There was the concerns about like, okay, well, my mom especially was concerned about, oh, is he going to try to frame you for some other crime? Is he going to try to have you arrested? Like, is something badly going to happen like
Yeah.
that?
The boogeyman thought. Right here we go
Yes,
again. Right.
the
Yeah. So you're
boogeyman
right.
thought.
Yeah.
But my biggest concern was that because at this point, by the time I actually got on a plane and got to Perugia and was about to meet him in person, years had gone by. Like when I first reached out to him, it was in 2019, and then the
Oh, wow.
pandemic happened.
Right.
And so I wasn't going anywhere during the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I corresponded with him throughout. So we spent years communicating via email prior to me arriving. And what was difficult was that he was inconsistent. Like sometimes he would be very warm and accommodating and complimentary and seemingly on the brink of like a breakthrough and a mea culpa. And then alternatively, he would be very defensive and more deeply entrenched in his worldview. And because he was very hard to tease apart that way, at least when it came to his perception of the case, it didn't feel like I really knew where he stood.
Yeah.
And that was really tough because where he stands still has a deep implications in my life. It's, because of him, there are people who still believe horrible things about me and, send me death threats. So like, this is a still like open wound that has not been, healed over. And over the course of those 2 years of us corresponding, I realized that I was making a huge mistake, which was that I was looking to my prosecutor, to my adversary, to this person who hurt me as the means by which I would be healed.
Very
And
good.
that was
That's a very important thing to realize. Okay.
that was a huge mistake, because what that meant was that if I was going to Perugia hoping that he would, come around and say I was wrong and I'm sorry and all of that, all of the things, all of the acknowledgments that I just so desperately wanted, if that was my goal, I was going to fail. And I would be setting myself up for more pain. Instead, what I realized was that the obstacle between me and my own well-being was not my prosecutor, but myself. There was something in me that needed to be expressed for me to get to a place of well-being. And that expression was what I ultimately arrived at in my conversation with my prosecutor, which I describe in my book. It's going to be depicted in the TV show, so I hope people will watch it. But I think the thing that really shifted things for me was that realization that if everything depended on me being able to show up and present my case and give my prosecutor what I had to give him, then I couldn't fail. Then I was effectively a superhero. I was unstoppable.
I love that. Right.
And once that settled in, I felt so at peace. I felt like it's the one time in my life that I felt deeply in flow with the universe. Everything was just working in the same direction. Everything was flowing. And so I arrived at that meeting with a deep sense of reassurance. And my only fear was that at the last minute, seeing him in person, it would be so triggering that I would be sort of shocked back into a state of defensiveness and fear. And that was my concern.
Intimidation, fear. I mean, I imagine every time that you would see him, whether during those 8 years, it must have given you that kind of angst feeling. How when you're a little kid and a mean teacher would come in and you just get sick to your stomach. I mean, I'm trying to kind of relate to that sort of helplessness.
Yeah, or if you've been bit by a dog. If you're bit by a dog as a kid, you might be afraid of dogs for the rest of your life. It was absolutely like that.
Can you explain to the audience, though, when we're talking about what do you mean by agency? And again, she goes really deep in this in the book, and I really found the book in a lot of ways just very good with life lessons and teaching on how to kind of overcome anything. But you felt like you reclaimed a bit of your agency. What does that mean?
So what that means, agency is your ability to be effective, to do things in your life, to make meaningful choices, right? And I think for a very long time, I've felt justifiably thwarted, that I wasn't the protagonist of my own life. I was the pawn of someone else's, and that I didn't have any real way of making meaningful choices that would have that would make an impact, that would make a difference in my life. I felt that was that learned helplessness. And it was, again, this shift in perspective of realizing I actually do have the ability to make choices. It just requires me being willing to be curious about outcomes where there is no path ahead of me, and to be compassionate towards the people that I might encounter. Even just the choice to reach out to my prosecutor was an expression of agency in my life. And it came because I realized that even though everyone told me I couldn't do it or I shouldn't do it, a deep, deep part of me was feeling compelled, propelled to do this thing and to make this choice that I didn't have to make. I did not have to reach out to my prosecutor. This was not just me surviving a bad situation. This was me actively processing and choosing to enter into a relationship with someone in a new way that would help, that the process of that helped me reframe what this person meant in my life. And the ultimate outcome for me was, yes, I went there to understand him, but what I came away with was realizing that of the two of us, I was the one who actually had more power in our relationship than he did. And I realized that, again, like I had more power for choosing for myself, and I now had the responsibility of holding him in my hands.
For the
And
first time, right?
for
That
the
was the
first
first
time.
time, right?
Yes. And realizing that like my willingness to be open and curious and compassionate towards him had rendered him vulnerable in a way that I had not intended.
Or you probably never really thought about that. And then you experienced that. And then what does that make you feel like? I want to understand this before kind of, you don't really have a lot of support. No one really is kind of saying, hey, man, a great idea, right?
Yeah.
Regardless, you go because again, you're realizing this is part of sort of what you need to do to get whatever next step it is. What's it feel like afterwards? And I'm talking not just short term, but long term. Does that feel better? What did it feel like when you walked out?
Well, I felt like I was finally free. Like I finally figured out what freedom looked like in my life. And it didn't mean sort of ignoring or pretending that the bad things that happened to me didn't exist. And it also didn't mean feeling like I was trapped, that I was forever defined by those things. It was instead, I'm informed by them. I am propelled by them. I am motivated by them, but that doesn't mean that I don't get to make my own choices.
No,
I don't get
something
to
back. You reclaimed something. You did, right?
Yeah, and I made choices based upon my own principles and my own like what I believed was right. And again, these were choices that I made that didn't have to be made. Ooh, and my husband is telling me that I need to go pick up our daughter. Do we?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh, no worries. I'm so sorry, husband. I'm so glad actually that you're great. Just let me ask you one thing, and I'm just going to follow up. So, you were. What I wanted to ask at the very end is if there are 2 or 3 things that you would say to women, like, hey, listen, these are the things you got to remember to do. What would be 2 or 3 things you say that you need to, in your life so that if you go through something like this, you are good?
Okay, so again, the first one is that you are worth it. You are worth it. You have inherent value. So do not let anyone ever try to convince you otherwise.
Yeah, I love it.
2, one of the best ways of diffusing like the dread and overwhelm of a horrible experience is to be curious about it. Is that even our most painful experiences are worth exploring, are worth examining. And it's interesting how the examination of a painful thing will give you a deeper perspective that actually lightens the load. It's weird. It's like by going deeper, you suddenly feel lighter. And then maybe a third thing might be we are not islands. We do not exist alone. And that's both a blessing and a curse, right? Like we belong to people, and that is great. But also we belong to people. And that means that we have a responsibility. That means that we are beholden. And so carry that with the awareness that deserves.
Well, thank you. And I don't want to keep you late from picking up your children. Your children are very lucky to have you because I think they're going to be very strong little women and grow up to be wonderful women. So I just want to say, folks, if you like this show and it sparks something special and you please leave a review, a comment. That's the way to help the show grow. And please, I'm not going to say anything more. Amanda said it all. You need to follow exactly what she said because she told you exactly how to do it.